walking in power and light. You know, when I was a kid, they used to have very simple toys. And there used to be this toy, it used to have like a pull string, and it was the comedian, and it would say, the devil made me do it, right? So, you know, the kids in the neighborhood, they'd do something, and then they'd have this little, you know, this doll, and you'd pull the string, and you'd say, the devil made me do it, right? Apparently that was a wisecrack of that particular comedian. But it's really interesting because when we start looking at this conversation about duality, you know, in Science of Mind, we constantly affirm that there's no such thing as duality. There's no God and the devil and all of that. And then we're looking at that, and then we see all this devilish looking stuff that happens around us, right? And we see people, you know, we see genocide, and we see, you know, terrible policies, and we see racism, and we see people starving, and we see people dying, and we're saying, how can this be God? And as long as human beings have been trying to define God, we've been trying to define the devil, or define what is the source of all of this not God stuff, this not God looking stuff that happens. And every tradition has its own story about it. They have different names for God, different names for the negative beings. You have the Kabbalah, where they say, well, God was creating the world and kind of made a mistake. And so the intention is that we're supposed to find the divine spark in everything and correct the mistake. There's some myths about the divine aspect of God, the female divine aspect of God, Sophia, and she had a fall and she miscreated, and then she had to work her way out of the darkness, and Christ consciousness had to come down and save her. And in the process of that, there's all these demons and darkness that was created. You see in the Bible conversations about Lucifer being a fallen angel. Well, all of these stories have something in common. And all of those stories have something in common, is that they say, well, since there's nothing outside of God, then God must have created the devil. And what's difficult about that is when we look at what Ernest Holmes says about it, he says basically that the idea of duality, that there's a God and a good and a bad and a good and an evil, will pass away with the things that used to be. It'll no longer be something that people believe in anymore. But the reality is each of us have challenges in our lifetime. Each of us have challenges in our experience. Each of us have experienced something that felt like darkness, that when you see it, it hurts. When you experience it, and it causes pain. It's not what we wanted. It's not what we wanted to create. So then we're left with, well, what is the source of that? Some people say it's karma. That there was karma that we may have created in this lifetime or in a past lifetime, and we're burning off that karma. Some people say, well, in Science of Mind we talk about there's free will, that humans have free will, and we can create whatever we want, and sometimes we don't create in the highest vibration. So there's these energy bodies of grace consciousness, group thought, that has its own mechanism, and then all these negative things happen. Well, see, the thing is that when we in Science of Mind talk about there's no duality, a lot of times what that means and how we practice that is we stick our heads in the sand like the ostrich and act like bad things aren't happening, or act like they shouldn't be happening, or, as we've talked about before, if you were truly spiritual, you wouldn't be having this hard time. But when we look at historically, we see that people who have been the most spiritual people have had all kind of trouble. I mean, for real, they nailed Jesus to the cross, right? You see all these saints, and they all got burned and hanged and drawn and quartered, and you're like, well, wasn't God with them? And if God wasn't protecting them, is God going to protect me? You're like, what's going on up there? Is there some sort of a communication issue, right? Because I'm supposed to be protected and safe and in the love of God and all this, and I see people suffering around me that look like good people. They don't look like they did anything to deserve it. And so we have these crises of faith where we say, how am I supposed to survive this experience? You know, I don't know the answer to that question. But the only answer that I do know for sure is that what is inside of us is this divine creator. And it is this divine creation of light. And it is a divine creation of light that is more powerful than any of the other things that we just talked about. And so when we experience the not what we wanted, the ultimate answer really is, how do we tap into the light that has the power to dispel any negativity? It's some of the things, you know, as I'm going through ministerial school, we're studying a lot of different religions and a lot of different viewpoints and a lot of different conversations about these things. And instead of providing a real answer, all it does for me is open up more questions. But sometimes it's important for those questions to come up, because it causes me to kind of bring up what I thought I knew. I know when I was growing up, I grew up in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and I was very clear that I had the answers, because they had kind of like a sheet. It was kind of like, you know, like a book. And for this question, this is the answer. And for this question, this is the answer. And so you know, I wasn't really encouraged to question it, because the answer was already created, right? And so for me, that was unfulfilling, because I think that as the divine creator created us all individually, that all of these different ways of looking at God, looking at defining the creator, look at how do we create God in our image, how do we redefine not just what we think about God, but how God lives in us, and how does that express itself? The more that we are constantly questioning and redefining and thinking about it, the more I think of an experience God has through us. I think if I were this overarching, you know, cosmic force, this divine consciousness, this divine energy with consciousness, I think that because we have this individuality, each of us sees and views how God is differently. Just as we all have a unique DNA, just as we all have a unique way and time and place in the whole experience, each of us views God in our own unique way. And there's a number of different ways of looking at God. You know, we have the people, we think about the divine consciousness as everything that is has divine consciousness in it. It's the divine cosmos, it's the universe, it's everything that has energy. And that's one way of looking at God. There's another way of looking at God which says that whole cosmos, that whole energy, all of that, I have all of that in me. So we look at ourselves as a wave in the ocean, right? We're a part of the ocean. Everything that is in the ocean is us, but we occur for a brief time as this particular incarnation. But we're not the whole thing. We're just an expression of it. But everything the ocean has, I have. But there's another way of looking at God that we don't talk about as often in Science of Mind and in New Thought, because we're so busy trying to emphasize that God is not outside of you, that God is the wave inside of you, that we don't often talk about that third face of God. The face of God, that's thou, right? So when we sing praise and we say, we praise you, O God, well, that doesn't mean that that doesn't mean God is inside of us, but there's a whole lot of God outside of us too. And sometimes when we are in a space of trouble, when we're in a space of hardship, when life just feels tight, and we want to be completely in tune with the divine. We want to say, I know God's got my back. I know it's going to be fine. I know that, God is only for me. And if God is for me, who can be against me? We want to be like that all the time, right? Okay, then reality hits, and you look at the bill, or you look at the medical report, or you turn on Facebook, or you turn on the news, or you watch the CNN, and you're like, ugh, what is going on C-SPAN? And all of a sudden, it doesn't feel so powerful that I'm so much in alignment with the divine. We start getting lured into the delusions that the reality brings us. We start looking at this looks like reality. And this conversation about God starts to feel like concept abstract. Starts to look like it's a good idea, but I need the rent paid. It's a good idea, but I don't feel safe. It's a good idea, but this thing needs to change. And so the temptation is to start looking at all of the things that seem like reality when what we need to look at is the divine reality. And how do we do that? Sometimes when we're in that space, I tell Annette all the time, it's okay to cry for help. Sometimes our egos, sometimes our limitations, sometimes our false beliefs, sometimes we are just expanding in our experience of the divine, and we may not have expanded in our experience of the divine to that point yet, where those doors are definitely there to be opened, but we may not have opened them yet. And in that space, it is okay to cry out, Spirit, help me. Spirit, bring me what I need. Spirit, show me what I need to know. Open within me that space of consciousness that can deal with this. Help me know how to let go of my limitation. Help me know how to let go of that false belief. Sometimes we have a false belief that we've had so long we just know it's the truth. And it's okay for us to look at that face of God that looks like thou. When I can't access it inside myself, I can reach out knowing that what God is out there, knowing that what God is in here, and still say, I'm going to look in this mirror and say, create in me a new heart, O God, and renew that spirit within me. Cast me not away from thy presence. Let me not feel this separation. Let me restore to me the joy of your salvation. It sounds like you're speaking outside of yourself, but we can never speak outside of ourselves because we know that we are one in Christ consciousness. But when I can't see it, it is okay for me to call out to the divine. Call out to the divine in me. Open my heart. Call out to the divine in me. Create that space, deepen that space. I may have, this much space right now, but this situation is calling on me to have this much space. I need this much space. I need spirit to flow through me in an unprecedented way. I know that it's within me to release those barriers. I know that that's my birthright. I'm calling out. And we know that as we call out to the divine is right there. Just as we reach out for God, God is reaching out for us. And so there's no such thing as reaching out too much. We can be extreme in our supplications to the divine to create in me that new heart. Where I am unable to forgive, give me the strength to let it go. Where I am unable to let it go, open my heart, expand, purify. And in that space, it's not that I am only limited to what I think I have the capacity for now. I am actually able to expand, to grow, to develop, to evolve. In East Indian society, in Hindu society, they have 4 different castes. And the castes were not originally designed to be something you were born into and your whole family stayed that forever. So one of the lowest castes would be like your laborers. There would be people who make a living by their hard labor, by their hands, by their manual labor. And the next step would be someone who's more of a merchant, someone who's a little more removed from the hard labor but still manages it. The next level would be like a warrior, or people who do communications, or ambassadors, or politicians. And then the last level, the highest level, would be the Brahmin, who are, the ones that are the priests and the teachers and the scholars who are close to God. Well, when you look at the evolution of ourselves, you can see that we have these evolutions within ourselves as well. There are times when, at our lowest point, we relate to that I have to have my hand bring in that money. I have to have my hand bring in the food. I have to have my hand have that job. I have to be in touch with the physical reality of it. But the next step above that would be more of a merchant. And the next step above that would be more in communication. And we just keep moving higher and higher in our spiritual development until we become Brahman. And we realize that our needs are always met because we're in touch with the divine. We don't have to go to war for it. We don't have to negotiate for it. We don't have to, manipulate the world so that it fits for us, so that we're making that profit. We actually evolve as human beings into the Brahman caste within ourselves. And humans have evolved the same way. You look at, when we, say we evolved from animals or something, there was a very physical way of having to get your food, of having to, kill another animal or, a vegetable or whatever you needed to do. Until we get to the point where we are now. We went through, some warlike periods. We went through, Renaissance. We've been through Enlightenment. We've been through Industrial Age. Now we're in an age of energy. And in this age of energy, we actually have the opportunity, as even those of us who are in spiritual search, to actually start looking at what is the energy representation in the world right now, and how do I relate energetically to what's happening. And so in the Science of Mind conversation that we're having in this new thought, we relate to energy as God. We relate to everything around us as being a product of some sort of an energy, and we actually have the use of the law. We put our energy, our thought, our intention into something, and we create it, and we actually are responsible for bringing it into being. But bringing it into being, as we talked about last week, isn't necessarily the test of spirituality. The test, the highest evolution of our human species, is to be engaged with Christ consciousness. That is the highest consciousness that we have. It's the part of our spirit that's in alignment with the highest aspects of God. That's the one soul. That's our deepest, our most highest fulfillment of our evolution. I was looking at a quote by Ernest Holmes, and he was saying, Christ means the universal idea of sonship, of which each is a member. We're told that to have the mind in us, which is also in Christ Jesus. Each of us has partaken of Christ's nature to the degree that Christ is revealed to us, through us, and to that degree we become Christ. So the idea of Christ consciousness is this idea that we are actually children of the divine, that we are that wave, that we are part of that most holy energy. And that to the degree that we can accept that, that is the degree to which we actually become Christ. I've often said that, my intent and goal in this lifetime is to be so in alignment with Christ consciousness that when I walk into a room or I walk into a situation, that it's as if, Jesus the Christ, that embodiment of Christ consciousness, walked into the room. And if that degree of spirituality walked in the room, what would be present? Darkness would flee. There would be no room for hatred. There would be no room for separation. People would actually, in that presence, experience a higher consciousness within themselves. Healing would be possible. You look at miracles that Jesus did when he was here, raising the dead, healing people, casting out demons. All of this is within us to do. But we want to be, I think, sometimes kind of logical about it. We want to be reserved and have it to the extent to where we feel comfortable about it. And certainly nobody wants to look crazy by being some sort of a mad zealot that's all about, I can walk in and, heal the sick and all this other stuff. And so, we kind of want to be reasonable in our experience with the divine. But the experiences that we are experiencing right now, in this time, in this moment, are so extreme that we are called on to expand our fanaticism, our willingness to just be extreme in our love for the divine, be extreme in our calling out for the divine, be extreme, completely surrendered to giving ourselves over to this higher consciousness. Because when we are in this tepid middle ground, we start to see that the things that look like reality, this negative dark reality that looks like a cold, hard, diseased, genocidal world, that starts to look more real. And if there's one thing that has us miss the mark, if there's one thing that's a sin, it would be to identify with the delusions of this world instead of knowing who we are as spiritual beings. There really is no other thing. So when we relate to what looks like reality as if that is the truth, when it is not the truth, it is just a mirror, we are missing the entire point of our spiritual existence right now. Because all we are here to do is spiritual development in this lifetime. The rest of this stuff is a game platform. It's just a game. And to the extent that we play that game, to the extent that we have spirit lodged within us, is the way that we're able to play that game and realize that it's just a form. But it's so easy when how this occurs makes me feel afraid. It makes me feel unsafe. It makes me feel hungry. It makes me feel afraid to see other people suffering. And how do I address those things? And do I just go all spirit and then I ignore reality? Well, the thing is that we have a twofold path. Remember, we've said that the truth of the matter is that we are to love God and love our neighbor as ourselves. How do we love our neighbor as ourselves? Once we love God, once we know who God is in us, how can we look at the suffering of our neighbor and say, oh, wow, that's really too bad, and let it go with that? How can we not be involved? How can we not go to the aid? When we have within ourselves an absolute divine barometer of truth, of what is higher vibration of light, of what is love, of what is compassion, of what is goodness, when we see not that in the world, we are called upon to get into action. We are called upon to say something. Nonviolence doesn't mean you let people beat up on you. It means that you operate from spirit in the highest ways possible. That we don't perpetuate violence, we don't resist it, but we are absolutely a stand for what our inner truth is. And when we know what our inner truth is, then we're able to actually fulfill on the law and the prophets. We're able to fulfill on love God and love your neighbor as yourself. I love me, I love God, I love my neighbor. I cannot watch my neighbor suffer and be silent. It's all part of one package. And so we are called on, in our Christ consciousness, in our divine reality, to be of service. We are called upon to exercise our compassion. We are called upon to expand our capacity to love. We are called upon to expand our capacity to heal. And when we do that, I was reading there's a biography. There's actually Yogananda had written a book, The Yoga of Jesus. And he says, communion with the Holy Comforter brings attunement with Christ consciousness indwelling in the body as the perfect soul. Through deeper communion with the Christ consciousness comes realization of the soul's oneness with omnipresent spirit, the little self expanding to its infinite self, to encompass the boundless divine kingdom of ever-existing, ever-conscious, ever-new bliss. When we are in that deeper communion, we come into a deeper realization of who we are. And we begin to realize that all the things that seem beyond our control, that seem beyond our power, that we will be shown the way to deal with that. Because there is, and I say this over and over and over, there is nothing more powerful than the infinite power of God. There is nothing more powerful than the light of God. There is nothing more intense than being able to know that no matter what darkness exists in the world, it cannot overcome you. You are infinite spirit. I am infinite spirit. We walk in the boundless light of the divine. And knowing that, there is nothing that can overcome you. Not disease, not lack, not limitation, not someone's politics, not whatever's happening at work, not other people's personalities. Other people may be operating in their free will, but when we are walking in the light of the divine, doesn't mean things aren't going to come up. But what it does mean is we can be in the comfort of the divine bliss, knowing that it's handled, knowing that no weapon formed against you shall prosper, knowing that greater is He that is in you, He that's in the world. And so we can trust that. And when we are in that space to know that we can trust who we are, that we can trust who God is in us, it doesn't matter what story anybody has about the devil. It doesn't matter what story people believe in about duality. We know there is only God, and there is only good. And we are ever safe in the divine arms. And so knowing that, we are peace. So whatever is coming up, as you go through life, as I go through life, stuff happens. Whatever it is, take it back to God and know that you are more than a conqueror.